The conversation starts now.
It's time for THC Live.
Hello, I'm Nikita Graham.
And I'm Shane Fox, and welcome to a very special episode of THC Live. Hard to believe we were at our season finale.
The season finale.
It's been a fast 3 months plus, but if you've missed any of it, you kind of got onto it late, and you go, gee, I wonder what happened in those first 2 episodes. I don't understand Shane's character. What's he up to? How can they go back and find us, and what could they do?
We're now on YouTube as well, so you can find us at THC Live Space TV on YouTube. And also, you can comment, you can join in, you can find all the past episodes also on Facebook, right here at THC Live.
Now, if you haven't done that, tonight you're going to have a little special opportunity to see some of our greatest hits in the show. We're going to kind of look back, right?
Yeah, we're going to go back and check out our favorite moments, our highlight reel, you know, some
things
of the fun.
Yeah, and also, you know, things that got us thinking. You know, we were all about trying to, get rid of all the mistruths, I guess, and all the falsehoods. So the things that stuck out for us maybe over the last 3 months plus. We'll get into some of that as well. Also joining us will be Don Davies, the NDP MP for Vancouver Kingsway. He's been very critical of the federal government's plans for legalization, not because he doesn't like the idea of legalization, he just doesn't like the way they've been going about it so far. He's going to join us from his parliamentary office in Ottawa via Skype. That's coming up in just a few minutes. But first,
we are going to share with you a little mashup, I guess, of some of our favorite growing pains.
Over the course of 10 episodes, we trace the history of prohibition in North America from the 1600s to the present.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
In the 16, 17, and 1800s, cannabis used for ropes, sails, and textiles was grown across North America. The 1893 Indian Hemp Drug Commission found moderate use of hemp drugs is attended by no evil results at all. Canada's Opium and Narcotic Act banned marijuana, even though the word cannabis never appears in the bill. It was written in by hand before the final vote by an unknown person who was never identified. The U.S. Army found no medical evidence that cannabis causes insanity in soldiers working in the Panama Canal Zone. Despite opposition from the American Medical Association, Harry Anslinger got the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act signed into law.
And I'm calling Bellevue because you're nuts!
But the presiding psychiatrist at Bellevue Hospital said marijuana lacks the addictive qualities of opium and other drugs. A 5-year study by the New York Academy of Medicine concluded marijuana doesn't lead to addiction, doesn't lead to harder drug use, and doesn't cause juvenile crime or delinquency. Anslinger responded by announcing that anyone who carries out marijuana research without Bureau of Narcotics approval would be arrested and tried on federal charges.
Our situation has not improved.
Popular Mechanics detailed 25,000 items that can be made from hemp and declared cannabis the new billion-dollar crop.
Show me the money!
Cannabis and hemp cultivation were banned. Instead of 25,000 hemp-related products, there would be 0. Petroleum, timber, chemical, and pharmaceutical companies were thrilled. Swingers, squares, and beats.
You're a slacker.
The 1,100-page Schaefer Commission report shattered everything the government claimed about marijuana since the 1930s. It completely destroyed Harry Anslinger's gateway theory, stated marijuana does not constitute a major threat to public health, and concluded that marijuana should be decriminalized. President Nixon,
Well, I'm not a crook.
he created the DEA.
Limitless power!
The Ledane Commission concluded cannabis use does not cause violent crime, and prohibition wastes police time, clogs the justice system, provides funds for organized crime, and creates a subculture with a
complete lack of respect for the law.
They recommended removing criminal penalties, saying the law on the books is at extreme variance with the facts. The Canadian Medical Association declared cannabis is not a narcotic. Health Canada called for decriminalization. No changes were made to the law. The war on drugs.
Okay, he's on fire. He's on fire. He's on fire. He burned up. He's down. He's down.
I was asked by a group of children what to do if they were offered drugs, and I answered, just say no. Say yes to your life. And when it comes to drugs and alcohol, just say no.
Whatever they're selling, I don't want it.
Prime Minister Mulroney banned all literature about and advocacy for cannabis. No exemption was made for scientific, political, or journalistic writing. A DEA judge declared marijuana one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man and called its Schedule I classification unreasonable, arbitrary, and capricious. The Bush administration rejected his report on Saturday of a holiday weekend. Prime Minister Chrétien passed a law that would make Joe Stalin green with envy.
Joe Stalin.
You might want to try Joseph.
I think you'd remember that.
Oh, yes!
The Controlled Drugs and Substances Act allowed police to search property without a warrant, confiscate property without a conviction, and eliminated jury trials for cannabis trafficking cases. Conservative Senator Pierre-Claude Nolan's 5-volume report concluded,
almost a century ago, the enactment of prohibition laws was made possible through public misinformation.
It went on to say the scientific evidence overwhelmingly indicates cannabis is substantially less harmful than alcohol and should not be treated as a criminal issue. The response of the Liberal government was typical.
I am not listening to you.
Canada's Supreme Court declared cannabis basically harmless and said prison sentences for possession constituted a demonstrably unfit sentence. The government cut off funding for the federal medical marijuana research program.
This is nuts.
The Colorado Green Rush happened, and Dr. Sanjay Gupta reversed.
I've apologized for some of the earlier reporting because I think, we've been terribly and systematically misled in this country for some time, and I did part of that misleading.
A bill to legalize cannabis by July 1st, 2018 was finally introduced. Vladimir Lenin said a lie told often enough becomes truth. By the early 2000s, lies about marijuana's effects had been told for nearly 100 years. It's no wonder our leaders continue to believe them. They either haven't seen the latest research, or if they have, it seems they deliberately bury it because of their preconceived ideas or their political agendas. As Chuck Missler says, the only sure barrier to truth is assuming you already have it. Edmund Spencer put it this way: there is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all argument, and which cannot fail to keep man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is condemnation before investigation.
I'm telling you, we learn something every week from Growing Pains.
I love it. It's honestly amazing the things that have been kept from us all these years. And it's kind of cool now that it's getting brought out
into the light
in a fun little Growing Pains episode.
No, I'll tell you, it seemed like time and time again, it's talk about history repeating itself. Time and time again, the government, I've talked about this ad nauseum on the show, government commissions a report, they come back with the results, they don't like the results, they throw the report out.
Yeah.
Imagine if they did that with anything else. We would never stand for it, but we bought it hook, line, and sinker for about 100 years. But as we said, things about to change on July 1st, 2018. Now, you're a religious watcher of Growing Pains. You watched every episode. I'm going to tell you something about Growing Pains that you probably didn't realize.
Oh.
The folks that work on Growing Pains, now, me and Nikita like to think, and when I say we, I really mean Nikita, cool, they got the finger on the pulse of what's going on. Me, maybe not so much, but vicariously through Nikita, I feel like I know what's going on. But we got the folks that work on Growing Pains, Adam the editor, Michael the writer. They really have their fingers on the pulse of pop culture and what's happening. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Wilhelm scream. Have you?
No.
But I'm going to tell you now,
you've
heard the Wilhelm scream quite a bit over the last 3 months. Take a look.
Did you hear it? The scream? The Wilhelm scream? Voiced by Sheb Woolley, the man behind the Purple People Eater song.
It looks like a purple people eater to me.
And first used in the 1951 film Distant Drums, the Wilhelm has been used in over 300 movies and is named after Private Wilhelm in the 1953 movie The Charge at Feather River.
Wilhelm!
Yeah, I'll just fill my pipe.
The Wilhelm had mostly disappeared into obscurity until Oscar-winning sound designer Ben Burtt used it in the Star Wars and Indiana Jones movies. Since then, it's become something of a pop culture thing. We used a Wilhelm in each episode of Growing Pains. Did you catch them?
Naval powers for rope.
Slinger and Charles Sharman. Mortal blow when members of
1%. That's 1,000%. Pushback from the medical community and people.
Thanks, Wilhelm.
Know you've been a good friend, and that's in the thick and thin, and I know it's never gonna end.
See? You always learn something. You didn't even realize that was happening.
I didn't.
No,
but
me neither. I had
now,
no idea
like,
who it was.
It was crazy because I was actually playing back through my memory. I'm thinking like, oh, I do remember that. Well,
see, that's again.
You missed out.
Adam, the
you're
editor,
not
Michael,
really.
the writer. Their finger on the pulse of what's going on
I like
that
it.
no one else knows anything about. So I don't know if it's really the pulse of what's going on
is what they are.
or not. We got to get set for. We're going to bring, as we said, some of our greatest hits and things that really stuck out for us over the last 3 months or so. But first, let's see what's making a book club.
Next, we are joined by Don Davies here on Skype.
Yeah, Don, of course, the NDP MP for Vancouver Kingsway, joining us from his parliamentary office in Ottawa, and as Nikita mentioned, by Skype. Don, thanks very much for doing this. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Let us just ask you first off, we know that back a number of months ago when the federal government was holding their parliamentary hearings and they wanted to hear from Canadians, you were critical of the way the system was working and the way the process was laid out. Here we are a few months later. How are you feeling now?
I have mixed feelings about it. This is groundbreaking legislation. It's going to change really nearly a century of criminal, social, cultural attitudes and conditions regarding cannabis. So to me, what's really important is that we get it right. And I think the Liberal government, who I give credit for introducing this legislation, I believe are rushing this legislation a little bit too quickly through all of the processes. And as a result, there are gaps and some significant holes in the legislation that I fear will not be addressed before in their rush and haste to have this done by July 1, 2018.
What are some of those gaps?
What are
holes,
some
you
of the
mentioned
concerns that you have?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't deal with pardons in any way at all, which I think is a significant problem with the bill. The bill actually allows the provinces not only to come up with their own distribution and age limits, but it also allows them to deviate from the cultivation provisions, which allow households to grow up to 4 plants and Canadians to possess up to 30 grams. So provinces can deviate from that, and we're already seeing Quebec and Manitoba announce that they are going to deviate from that, which I believe threatens the substance and spirit of the bill itself. One issue that I really pushed was to legalize edibles and concentrates on July 1. The government at first was reluctant to do that at all. They amended the bill somewhat to allow the legalization of edibles and concentrates within 1 year after passage of the bill, which means it's probably 18 to 24 months off at this point. So those are some of the gaps that I see in the bill.
I have a question. So once the provincial laws are set, can they be changed after that? Or is it kind of once it's set, that's it? That's the law and the rules that they're being made?
Well, there is a review provision in C45 that obligates Parliament to review the legislation within 3 years, or I guess in 3 years. So there'll be a mandatory federal review of C45. In terms of the provinces who are passing legislation and coming up with schemes and regulations to deal with the legalization of the provinces, I guess they can bring in that legislation and make changes as they see fit.
But we can't veto it. It can't be vetoed by, like the federal law, because it's, like
no,
you were saying,
because you
it's a
said the
national
provinces,
thing, right?
it's a federal law, but the provinces have the ability, as you mentioned, to kind of put their own stamp on things.
Yeah, the federal legislation specifically allows the provinces to legislate in certain areas. We know they get to determine how they want to distribute cannabis. They get to determine the age of possession. They get to determine, and this is what I was mentioning earlier, I think improperly, they get to determine whether they allow the citizens of their province to grow the 4 plants per household or carry 30 grams in public. And Quebec and Manitoba have announced that they're not going to allow any growing in households for recreational cannabis whatsoever. And we haven't had a province say that they're going to reduce the 30-gram limit down to, say, 5 grams or 1 gram, but that could happen. And again, I think that defeats the very promise of the legislation, which was to bring Canadians legalization of cannabis. By the way, I should also say, in terms of a major criticism of this bill does not legalize cannabis. It makes it less illegal. It still maintains a criminalized prohibitionist approach to cannabis. And after July 1, 2018, there will be more offenses in the criminal code dealing with cannabis than there are presently.
What sort of new offenses will there be? You're making a lot of people very nervous right now.
Well, I know it's quite surprising. Well, if you grow 5 plants in your household, you're a criminal subject up to 14 years in prison. If you are caught in public with 31 grams, then there's a criminal offense and you can go to jail for 14 years as well. In Alberta, who have adopted an age of 18 for legal possession, if you're an 18-year-old who sells a joint to a 17-year-old, you're a criminal and you could go to jail for up to 14 years.
Wow.
And so it's good in the sense that it does allow the possession of some marijuana, and I guess in some provinces you'll be able to grow some, but generally that same criminalized structure is present, and I think that's going to surprise a lot of Canadians.
What about interprovincial trade too? There's a lot of mail order business when it comes to whether it's dispensaries or just businesses that are supplying it strictly in a mail order business. I know there's a case now dealing with alcohol from province to province before the Supreme Court. It should almost feel that if I live in Prince Edward Island and I'm buying something within Canada, I should be able to buy it from within Canada, whether I'm buying it in BC, Ontario, or in PEI itself.
Well, that's an excellent question. It's also something we raised in committee, where there is a lack of a permanent national online distribution system in this bill. So what this bill envisions is that while the provinces are setting up their bricks and mortar provincial distribution systems, Canadians can still access their marijuana through the medicinal cannabis regulation. But the federal government has told stakeholders that once the provinces have their distribution system set up, they will no longer be able to fall under the medicinal cannabis regulation. So the question arises, well, what happens after that? I have been advocating that we set up a national online distribution system so that if you're a producer in Ontario and you have customers in British Columbia, you can order and send your cannabis that way. Others are arguing that that's going to happen no matter what, that Canadians will be able to access through the internet the cannabis they want. So, but the lack of having an actual regulated legal structure for that, I think, is another deficiency in the Liberals' approach to legalization.
I just find it very interesting that there are going to be so few stores in some of the provinces. And how is that for, as soon as we make it legal, there's going to be a lot of people going to these
it's harder to get
stores. And how are you going to get it? If you can't order it online, are you going to drive for 4 or 5 hours to get to the dispensary, to the store that's going to provide it for you, right? It's crazy.
Yeah, and we brought that up as well. I think there's going to be a real problem with lack of production on July 1, 2018. I don't think we'll be able to produce as much cannabis as is currently being consumed. Several purposes in Section 7 of the bill, where the purposes are laid out, stipulate that the reason we're bringing in legislation, the purpose of this bill, is to take production out of the illicit world and bring it into the light and bring it into the regulated world, to make sure that Canadians have access to a supply of safe, properly regulated cannabis products. So I don't think the bill will actually meet that purpose on July 1, 2018, because of issues like the one you mentioned. Canadians, if they can't get it at a store in their area, say you live in Northern Ontario and there's no Ontario Liquor Board store near you, you will probably continue to access your cannabis through the illicit market. So the lack of having a widespread distribution network across this country so Canadians can get legal cannabis from the sources that they want, I think is another very big problem with the legalization approach here. And I put in an amendment that would allow the provinces to give out licenses to small craft artisanal producers as well, because I think they're a big part of making this successful. If we don't find a way to let the current growers in this country, particularly in British Columbia, if we don't find a way to have them brought into the legal production network, then I think that legalization will not work smoothly and Canadians will still have to access their cannabis through those sources illegally.
No, and you bring up an interesting point, whether it's the growers or then even the distribution, the dispensaries. We've seen some provinces, we've talked about Quebec, and there's others that are going strictly with the government route. They're going to handle all the retail outlets. And then there's other provinces that are going some sort of hybrid, which that's what you get the sense is going to be happening here in BC. What's your sense? I think you've mentioned before bringing the people in. These people have already been in business for years already. They have an expertise. They provide a service.
Yeah, I've been an advocate. I mean, it is a provincial decision, but as a federal politician, everything I've heard from sitting through 95 witnesses and going through this bill clause by clause is that we would be best served by having a really full, diverse distribution network. I think there's a role for, on liquor stores. I think that there's a role and a mandatory role for dispensaries and for the private market, and even for pharmacies. I think we should be seeking the widest possible distribution network because customers will feel comfortable in different milieus. Some people don't mind getting it from a liquor store, but others will want the expertise that you can only get, I think, from dispensaries who have served the market for decades. I also think there's a question of, frankly, fundamental fairness. A lot of people have sacrificed a lot over the last 20 years to grow and to market cannabis in a very heavily criminalized environment. And the irony is that many of those people will be pushed out of the market once it's finally legal. And I think it's perverse, ironic, and unjust.
Well, you mentioned we're running out of time, but when I think about how many people that worked in law enforcement that are now on the boards of all these LPs, it's you know what I mean. These guys spent a lifetime telling us how bad it was, and not even looking at scientific evidence. And now all of a sudden, when they get a check, they've changed their tune completely. There's so much hypocrisy going on right now. It's amazing.
A great deal. I want to just say one thing that I think is also a problem with this bill that I hope gets corrected, and that is C-45 prohibits the importation or exportation of recreational cannabis. And I think that's a huge mistake. The domestic cannabis market's estimated at about $10 billion in Canada. So it's got to be hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe even achieving $1 trillion globally. And I think that Canada, being a world leader here, has the opportunity to develop, first market, global leading technology, intellectual property, a wide range of products, so that when other countries start to legalize, and they're going to be, that we can actually be first to market in the world with a product that I think is sustainable, it's high tech, it's clean. You can take $5 of seeds and turn it into $1,000 worth of product at least. So it boggles my mind why this government would put basically hamstring Canadian entrepreneurs and businesses by preventing them from exporting their products, when we know that other countries like France and Italy, Luxembourg, Israel are going to be legalizing in the next few years ahead. So I really see the whole cannabis industry in Canada as one that's got explosive growth economically for Canada, and I think that's important to note and keep working on.
Well, Don, yeah, we're gonna have to drag them.
We can talk to you forever.
We're gonna have to drag them with pulling and screaming the whole way as it has for the last 100 years. Don, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. We appreciate it.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's Don Davies, NDP MP, of course, for Vancouver Kingsway. He's got a front row seat to what's happening, so he doesn't like the way the federal government's handling things, and he is still pro-legalization. He doesn't think they're going far enough. So we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll continue to follow Don's criticism and as he keeps an eye on the feds.
I like it. I like it.
Time now for one of another favorite segments here on THC Live. Of course, we're talking about, Canifax. It has been an absolutely amazing 13 weeks. It's crazy how fast the time goes. Don Davies, fantastic guest today, but we've had so many memorable guests.
We have. We've had just hit after hit every week. And so right now, I think, why don't we take a look at some of our favorite moments that we've had in the past 12 weeks. And these are some of our law and order moments with some of our favorite guests. Do you think that because we're making cannabis legal in Canada, do you think it's going to open the door for other drugs to become legal?
I think it's certainly possible, because I think that there's this attitude that because marijuana is going to be legal, the sky is going to fall. But we've seen in other states, in fact, which is, if anybody would have had a difficult part, you think the United States have, they've opened it up, and it seems like it's no big deal.
What might prompt a border guard to ask about cannabis use?
Profiling. Younger, when I'm at the port of entry helping clients, the people who are in those enforcement lines, they're always younger, they're wearing tie-dye shirts, they maybe have dreadlocks. You rarely see someone in a three-piece suit with a tie in that enforcement line. So a lot of it's, stereotyping someone younger who may be using marijuana recently or in the past few years.
Seems how old school that is. Like the whole movement, some of the movement as far as legalization is really moving forward, and there's still some way back here that it's a gateway, it's this, it's that. Exactly. And they're the same thing. Oh no, it wouldn't be the guy in the suit, it would only be the guy in dreadlocks, which is really like, who are you kidding?
Yep, I agree.
It all starts because they ask you a question.
Exactly.
And a question that really you're answering honestly because it doesn't seem like a big deal. Do you have to answer their questions?
Well, you don't, and most people answer it because they think, well, it's legal in Washington State, what's the problem? So I tell people you are under no obligation to answer that question.
What should you say to them then? Yeah. What's the right thing to say?
Well, I can't tell people what to say,
right?
Because I can't, put words in their mouth or tell them to lie. But what I can say is, if you do not answer that question, the worst thing that can happen is you get denied entry. If you admit that you have smoked marijuana, it's a lifetime ban. People don't think that they are going to be barred. They just think, I'll answer the question, I'll be on my way, and no problem. When they get denied entry, they're shocked. I deal with this at least once or twice a week.
And people,
these are very common.
They feel like authority, right?
Sure,
that they should be answering honestly, too.
You said it's Washington State where it's legal, the federal government runs the border. Exactly. And there's your difference, your disconnect.
That's where it gets confusing.
Right.
And especially now when it becomes legal in Canada, you're going to have it legal on the north side of the border, on the south side of the border, at least in Washington State. But that little line that divides those two jurisdictions, it is illegal, and in my opinion, for a long time will stay illegal.
Well, the guy in the uniform at the border has an incredible amount of discretion. I knew one fellow I thought was going to put up posters on big signs at the borders with pictures of Obama and Trudeau and saying they had smoked, and so why not us type of thing, in order to compare. When big, important people who have to cross the border for more important reasons, they allow them to do it. But when it's somebody who smoked, as you say, 20 years ago, they can say no.
What happens if someone has a medical card, say it's like an actual doctor, this is their medicine, what if they're trying to cross?
So I've seen cases where people have been given by the federal government of Canada a license to grow marijuana for their own medicinal purposes, and they've had their waivers taken away, or they've been denied entry and told they need a waiver.
How hard is it to navigate the legal system when it's like two different legal systems intertwined?
Well, that's the problem.
You've got Canada and the US, plus you've got Washington State and the feds.
And that's where it gets confusing. And so when people get denied entry and told they're banned for life, the only one who benefits is me.
But I will be in the Supreme Court of Canada this December to defend the entire cannabis industry based on what you just mentioned about alcohol and borders and provincial governments and how they regulate. So right now, the cannabis industry is being really shrunk down into these sections of provincial governments where they get to control the distribution, but that is actually unconstitutional. So there's a gentleman who got busted taking beer over the border between Quebec and New Brunswick, and he's in the Supreme Court of Canada arguing that the government has no right to block the trade of goods in Canada, and in fact, that's what our Constitution says. So we applied to intervene as Cannabis Culture, representing a bunch of dispensaries who came on board, and also everyone else, the licensed producers, everyone, saying that we also are going to be impacted by these unconstitutional monopolies, so we want to say, and they accepted us, so we get to go and argue on behalf of the entire cannabis industry.
So then the country is your market, it becomes.
Exactly. BC Bud should be available to our Eastern Province fellow citizens. I mean, we should be able to trade this product all across this country.
It's the Como case, Comeau. And you're right, the facts involve Mr. Como, who crossed the bridge in his hometown and went and purchased some alcohol over in Quebec where it was a bit cheaper. He brought back more than the 12 bottles of beer he was entitled to. I think he had 48. And it was all for his own personal consumption. And the police were doing a sting operation on the bridge, pulling people over and handing out tickets. And he has managed to bring that case from the very lowest rung of the court system in our country, the initial lower level trial court, all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, which will decide whether Section 121 of the Canadian Constitution, which prohibits interprovincial trade barriers, or appears to, is implicated by that kind of law. And ultimately, all the interveners that have come in on Mr. Como's side, the craft wine, the craft beer associations, have said, look, these rules stifle our industry and they stifle the ability of Canadians to have the broadest range of selection possible of goods that are legal and permissible for them to purchase. And certainly that should apply to cannabis as well.
How will police and courts handle all the stone drivers, or is this really going to be a big an issue as some are making it out to be?
It's an incredibly difficult issue because we know that people who consume cannabis, there's going to be something in your system for 90 days and sometimes more. So it's not about immediate consumption. When I first started practicing, the offense was impaired driving, to drive while your ability to do so was impaired by alcohol or a drug. And officers would get you out of the car and do the roadside tests and so on and so forth. Then they brought in the .08 breathalyzer thing, which was much more technical in terms of charging and so on. But we don't have the same type of device for cannabis. Sure, we've got all kinds of looking at cannabis, determining its presence. And that's the problem with Washington State, 5 nanograms. And you're presumed to be impaired, and it's not rebuttable. Whereas in Colorado, at least it's rebuttable. So the problem is for the medical users. Chronic medical users are all going to be over 5 nanograms, and they're not impaired. Because they've developed such a tolerance that it simply removes their... In some cases, they're better drivers because they're not experiencing the pain
while they're
that
driving.
they would have. You know, and it's the same in the workplace. People are kicking people out of work because, oh, they've got a hot piss test for cannabis. And you say, well, you know, what was their condition when they were not on cannabis? Were they able to function and do their work? I mean, surely that... And is it... Are they engaged in something where there is a safety issue? You know, so it's very, very complicated. I'm very concerned it's going to lead to very unjust situations where people who are going to be treated unfairly and are going to end up maybe in prison, certainly penalized, when they really haven't, their ability to drive is not impaired. The evidence is 97% of the impaired drivers is alcohol. So we got 3% other drugs.
Roadside tests, no doubt, have been a hot topic for the last 3 months.
Absolutely
what will they do? And a number of people, including that guest, talked about there is no test.
No.
There's no way of knowing exactly. And how long has it been in your system? How long does it stay in your system?
Exactly. And there's been a lot of habitual users before legalization kind of comes about. So what do you do?
They've built up a tolerance, as you said. Did anything stick out for you?
Well, I really liked the whole border crossing thing. I thought that was really informative in the sense of
who knew they could ask you that?
Exactly. And it's a little intimidating knowing that anyone could be crossing and you could get punished for just answering an honest question, which you feel you should honestly answer.
Exactly. If the U.S. Customs officer at the border says to me, have you ever smoked marijuana? And even if I said, yeah, I did when I was 13 in 1978, all of a sudden I'm in trouble. So, while the lawyer said, I think it was Len Saunders said, he won't tell you what to say, but you don't have to answer the question. The worst they can do is turn you away and go, okay, great, see you next time.
Yeah.
Don't answer the question would be the best advice possible. Do not answer the question.
Totally.
And again, it seems like they're only asking kids in dreadlocks. I know I've never been asked so far, but don't answer
Shane in his suit, they said he won't get busted, but he has been wearing the same. We're going to comment on he has a love for blue plaid.
Apparently I've been wearing this shirt a number of weeks and I didn't even realize.
But he also has variations of the blue.
Well,
I'm just going to throw that.
There's many layers to Shane.
I love the blue plaid.
That was a look back at some of our, legal issues and legal topics that were discussed on the show. We also had, though, numerous doctors on the show, veterinarians, patients who use cannabis to help treat their pain. So now we look back at maybe some of our medical discussions over the last 3 months.
So with all plant-based medicine, it's the interaction, it's called the entourage effect. So many different compounds working together produce the greatest healing effect, versus in synthetic pharmaceuticals, we isolate different chemicals to make a drug. Okay. So you never just get one thing in a plant-based medicine, but we would have a majority, an amount, a ratio of THC to CBD. And so traditionally, THC is what we test in urine, and it's what could give us a high, the psychoactive feeling. Whereas CBD is a really potent anti-inflammatory. So you think of an Advil or a Tylenol, that's an anti-inflammatory.
Right.
And so that's what the CBD is. But there's always a bit of THC, and we need some of the THC to make the CBD potent.
Regina would like to know if it's healthy and legal to give her children CBD supplements.
Unfortunately, we don't know a lot about that. There haven't been too many controlled studies looking at whether or not CBD, even purified CBD, what potential side effects there are. What we do know from most of the studies so far is that CBD really doesn't have any sort of deleterious side effects. But again, this is something that really needs to be addressed. And I know there are studies going on right now looking at cannabidiol, looking at CBD as a potential treatment for pediatric epilepsy, which is a very serious problem. And most of the drugs that are around now aren't particularly effective. So I certainly hope that we're going to get some promising data in from a lot of those studies that demonstrate not only the safety of CBD for children in terms of pediatric applications, but its efficacy as a way to treat these really devastating symptoms associated with epilepsy.
You yourself had decided that you wanted to try the route of trying cannabis, and that you had gone to California, you were searching for a doctor, somebody who could help, and eventually the first time you were able to give it to your daughter. Can you kind of describe that day and how that felt? And
I was terrified because I was about to break the law and give my daughter a medication that I couldn't find at any doctor anywhere that was willing to even look at. The reason why I chose to do that was because in January, I think it was January 6, 2008, I was told that my daughter don't plan on school for September, and she would not be here for Christmas.
So obviously at that point you go, I got no choice. Like if not now, when?
Well, it was about 5 months after they told me that, and I just went, you know what? The only thing, I'm going to lose my daughter no matter what, if I have to try. And it was the single most best decision I've ever made in my life.
Because we tried every single med, and there was this last med, and it didn't help. So that's when we had to start trying cannabis, because that was our only last hope.
Yeah, there was. It was a last resort, and quite honestly, cannabis needs to be thought of as a first option, not a last resort.
And because we tried every single one, and that was our last one we tried.
Quality of life, before and after. Apple, like, you're laughing like it's not even a question.
Yeah.
You can't even.
Before, every time she seized, we didn't know how much was coming back. We were literally losing her every time she seized. I didn't know what abilities were going to come back. I had no idea if she was going to come back, because she goes into subclinical, it's non-convulsive epileptic status epilepticus, and it's so you don't even know. She just is like catatonic. So you just don't know. You never really know how much is coming back. Is she going to make it the next time? And to now, I mean, the difference. I mean,
Right.
she's talking, she's reading. The leaps and bounds over. We're going to be a decade in May this year of Haley using medical cannabis, and I can tell you the long-term effects are amazing. The ability to learn, retain, I mean, just...
I had troubles reading, and now that I've been on it, I can read a book that has 799 pages.
Wow.
Awesome.
And I used to only be able to read books like this thin.
It really seems that if Pfizer came up with CBDs, it would be the miracle drug and it would be everywhere right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, it's ironic because, for years, when researchers such as myself were looking at the cannabinoid system, there was very little interest from the large pharmaceutical companies in what we were doing. And it was only when certain jurisdictions in the States were looking at legalization, Canada started moving towards legalization, that we now suddenly see these research programs being undertaken by some of these larger pharmaceutical companies to look at, more effective applications for some of these cannabinoid medications. But that's absolutely an important point.
What about the effects of smoking marijuana? Is it harmful? Because a lot of people say one joint's a pack of cigarettes.
I have some colleagues who focus just on cannabis and have there's a bunch of research and evidence now that it's counterintuitive, but inhaling can be helpful for chronic lung disease and asthma. For what we call chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and asthma, it can actually increase like the lungs can open up more, and it can be healing.
And
it can improve outcomes in spirometry.
Because they talk about
in vaporized, and this is even in inhaled smoked forms. Wow. So I don't have the study to quote it. I know my colleague who does, but it's incredible if people do research the evidence that is coming out.
The comment on use during pregnancy. Is this is, I know this has been kind of a topic
That's a very good question.
Wow.
So, I mean, like a lot of medicine, drugs, lifestyle, and pregnancy, it's not something we study very much at all, because really who wants to be in the study group or the non-control group?
Right.
Well, let's just see.
Just go to my new baby.
Right. No, you know what? That's a super interesting point.
And I know some women who would have very small amounts inhaled for acute nausea in pregnancy. And they did that on their own choice and felt fine, and they've had healthy babies. But I mean, I can't comment on any evidence, but it's something that it's hard for us to ever find evidence on.
That's
and the
fascinating.
worry is with the developing brain, THC, and a psychosis link. Bottom line in anyone, that's why our colleges generally see 25 and under.
Right.
Or else 18 years and under. That's where the worry is with the THC in cannabis, whereas other parts of cannabis are used for childhood epilepsy and cancer.
Yeah, totally.
Very,
a lot of cases
and
like that, yeah.
glioblast brain tumors, very successful, and that's more the CBD, but there is also the THC. So I kind of jumped ahead, but I can't speak. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it in pregnancy, but that's because I don't have the knowledge.
Think about how difficult it is to do a clinical trial.
So traditionally what you do is you have a control group that don't use your medicine, and you have a test group that you test. Now, what other drugs can the control group and the test group both be using this product on the side, right? They just go get their little medicine on the side.
Yeah.
So it's a unique thing there. And the other thing that when I give talks to groups, one of the funny things I do is I ask, okay, who in this group smoked drugs in the last 2 months? Nobody puts their hands up, right? You're talking to an audience of 100 people. They lie like rugs. So when physicians, when they start to get the history, people tend to lie about drug use. They tend to lie about sexual history. There's things that they're uncomfortable with. So the other thing that we're looking at doing is doing hair tests, blood tests, to find out what there's really in this system. It's an area called molecular epidemiology. And the other thing, it's very difficult to control the dose. So if you smoke a product and you draw that in, it's very heterogeneous, so it's hard to know how much you're actually getting in.
Right.
And there's even a difference that if you draw this into your lungs versus you bring it into your mouth and blow it out your nose, the pharmacology of it is different.
Really?
And it's something, until you start to think about it, you just don't think about it. And let's say oil as well. You say, well, okay, I'll standardize it, I'll put it in oil. Well, if you swallow that product, what happens is it goes through your GI tract through a first pass metabolism, and you end up producing metabolites that have different strengths than some of the THC and CBD would have. But if you put that in an oil under your tongue, the pharmacology is different. The onset's a little bit quicker, and it doesn't go through the first pass metabolism. So one of the big problems is the prohibition on cannabis has also been a prohibition on the science of cannabis.
Let's talk about the opioids. So long we've been given the information and misinformation that marijuana was a gateway drug. Constantly we were told that. Now we're hearing from people, you know what, it's an exit drug.
Yeah.
Or the idea that you could be using medical cannabis instead of being on the opioids in the first place.
One of the things they found is that people that have chronic pain, there's actually a belief that their endocannabinoid system is getting disrupted, and there's inflammation that is leading to this. And they find that the cannabinoid, particularly high CBD products, can get them off opioids. Now, when we think about this use, I think this pain reduction is a big part of it. So there's a lot of people, particularly as they get older, they get more pains, more chronic pains. And the solutions that physicians have been dealing out before are opioids or even over-the-counter prescriptions, right? Over-the-counter drug like Tylenol and this type of thing, all of which are bad for you. It seems that if you're using particularly high CBD cannabis, you can get off of these things. So there's people whose lives have been disrupted because they have chronic pain. And if they start using cannabis products, they can get off the opioids.
Not a gateway drug, an exit drug.
Which is amazing after all these years of us being told the complete opposite.
As soon as you smoked a joint, next thing you know, you were grabbing a needle.
Yeah.
That's the way it was sold to us.
Totally.
I believe my parents still think that way.
I think a lot of people still think that way.
Amazing. For me, it's just the different uses, the medical uses, the treatments for so many different ailments and how many people we've met that just talk about the different things. Haley Rose, obviously, I know that was one of your favorite
That was
guests.
one of my, hands down, one of my, I found it so amazing that her mom, after, or say 10 years ago, her mom finally took it upon herself and said, no, I'm going to try this.
She broke the law, right?
She did. But my favorite thing that she said was, it shouldn't be the last resort, it should be the first resort.
Yeah.
And I, after hearing all these things from all these doctors, all these patients, people who have had amazing effects, positive effects on their life, and it should, and it's, I think finally now too,
yeah.
I think in the next 5 years, there's going to be all these amazing things they're finding out and outcomes over,
Well, it's amazing shit. They had to jump through hoops, how many doctors you had to see just to get permission, and instead, now you can go pretty much anywhere and walk in. But it's amazing how quickly times have changed and how she had to break the law. Now, that was just for people, the medical use, CBDs for people. But what about our four-legged friends? Well, we were fortunate enough to have veterinarian Dr. Catherine Kramer on the show, and she talked about the use of cannabis and CBDs for our pets.
A great story of a lab with lymphoma, cancer of the lymph nodes, who came to see me, and they had already scheduled the euthanasia appointment because this dog was just so miserable. And they came to see me and said, can you offer a miracle? Can you do anything? And I said, geez, I really don't you can we'll try some CBD and see. I know it's not going to hurt. This dog I get choked up talking about it. This dog's favorite thing to do is to, grab his leash and go to the local park and play ball. And this dog hadn't done it in months. And after starting the first dose of CBD, the dog slept and then woke up in the morning, grabbed his leash, dragged them to the park, and played for the first time in months. And he lived another 6 months after that. I see huge benefits in patients with seizures, with anxiety, with arthritis, and any type of chronic pain. Unfortunately, I do a lot of cancer work, supportive care and geriatric palliative care. And it's, like I say, it's in some patients, it's been a miracle. At this point, the college's point of view is that this is experimental, it's illegal, and as a veterinarian, I'm not allowed to talk about it. I'm not allowed to prescribe it. And after 5 years, I'm just starting to chat with the college about what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not. Pet owners are going to be the ones that nudge the veterinary community into becoming more proactive about using CBD and doing the research that we need.
So, Dr. Kramer, for 5 years, have you been breaking the law every day?
Well, depends on who you ask, I suppose.
Yeah.
I tell people that yes, I'm by my college rules, I'm not allowed to prescribe or recommend, and these are the side effects, these are the potential complications. And if you still want to use it, then I will tell you where to get it safely. I will tell you how to use it safely. And I will stand by that, absolutely.
That was really cool. I was away in Toronto while we did that one, and so I found it fascinating when I was watching it, and she was talking about the animals that were pretty much on death row, to say, say the least. And she brought them pretty much back to life, and they were eating and living and lived amazing lives for a few years after that too, right?
And what we've heard from doctors who thought they were being shunned or maybe ostracized a little if they were looking at using cannabis to treat their patients. She, Dr. Catherine Kramer, was in it all by herself at the very beginning. More and more veterinarians are realizing what can be done with CBDs, but something I never would have thought of until we talked to her.
It's cool.
It was
to use it,
fascinating.
I think everyone should try it on their animals.
Fascinating. So we've talked about the legal issues on the show. We talked about medical issues on the show, but obviously a big part of THC Live has been hearing from advocates, people who have spent their lives fighting for the legalization, the decriminalization of marijuana. I'm thinking of so many different folks that were on, but two obviously that are big friends of ours, Don Briere and Carol Gwilt, big supporters of THC Live.
Huge supporters.
Just two of the advocates that we spoke to over the last 13 weeks.
We're harmless, peaceful people. There's millions of us across this country that choose cannabis as an alternative to alcohol or any other kind of substance they could take because it's safe and it's non-toxic and nobody's ever died from cannabis.
On our side of the fence, we look at it from the point is the law was broken, the law was wrong. Enforcing laws based on lies is misuse of our tax resources, and that's criminal, especially if you use willful blindness to look away from the evidence that is there.
No, I was an anti-marijuana, anti-drug, teacher's pet authoritarian who loved a man in uniform.
Okay, do we have a breaking news logo? Because that would be good right now.
The honest truth is,
Really?
I love police, I loved authority. I was a teacher's pet, a leadership student, and I gave my sister and all my friends such a hard time for being teenagers, basically. If they drank or did cannabis or anything else, I'd call them stupid. I was always really bad, actually. I was kind of probably a jerk, a little bossy brat, but my best friend started smoking pot and reading Cannabis Culture magazine and watching Pot TV and talking about this marijuana seed man named Mark Emery who was running for office that year in BC. It was the BC election campaign in 2001. And that same year, 9/11 happened. And it seems unrelated, but for me, as a student, watching as we were being taught about what was going on, I was stunned to realize that my stoner friends knew all about where Afghanistan was, first of all. They knew all about the military-industrial complex. They knew politics. They knew world events. They were smart, basically. And I thought, how can these stoners be so well-informed about the world and history and all this? I just didn't understand, but it was because they were watching Pot TV and reading Cannabis Culture. And so I started opening my mind And then I tried beer one night, Pilsner, took shot glasses because it was so terrible. But I also tried cannabis by using a gravity bong in a hot box bathroom. So, you know,
Oh, we're going
teenagers,
retro.
hey?
Yeah, retro
Teenagers.
tonight. Yeah.
But it really changed my perspective, and it started making me question everything, which is really, I think, why governments and authority figures are so concerned, because after that point, I didn't believe any of the drug education, so I did dabble in other drugs, which wasn't wise, but I'd been lied to, and that's why the government's continued misinformation campaign is so dangerous, because when they keep lying, people are going to say, well, what else are you lying about? And they might not take good advice.
What was it like in the eye of the storm in that moment? Like we talked before, you mentioned you were 26, which was probably a lot better than being 19 at that point. If that could help at all.
If I could just, yeah, definitely. I'm glad I wasn't 19, you know, in Nagano, and that the experience that I had prior to that, being on the World Cup tour for 7 or 8 years, traveling around the world, probably helped in many ways. Having the small media exposure that I had, though, to at the time as an athlete, probably helped me out a little bit too. So. It was intense, you know, it was a 10 out of 10 on what the heck, you know. So it was just a matter of really like deciding that I was gonna stay behind cannabis and get behind it and legitimize it and create an atmosphere where I could be proud of my medal and that Canadians could be proud of it. And so I think, you know, that's been my quest over the last 20 years. I knew it wasn't gonna be overnight. And I spent a lot of time working in construction and operating heavy machinery and just working, making ends meet, but at the same time taking the media requests to talk about cannabis, defending the athletes that ended up in the media and why, you know, athletes would choose cannabis. Why is Michael Phelps, you know, getting busted with a bong and instead of a bottle of whiskey? And so
right, like that would have been okay if he was walking around with a bottle of whiskey at a party, no problem.
That's okay, yeah,
but
totally
it was a bong,
normal.
so it changed the entire conversation.
Right, and so I had to explain why, you know, that was a healthy choice at the time, and it was taboo to say, and it was, you know, maybe at the time taking a few opportunities off the table for me, and but I knew in the long run it was the right thing to do. The truth about cannabis needs to come out.
Can you describe what it's like to actually like have PTSD and how you've kind of been
Do you know
coping
you
with
have it?
Like,
Would-
is it something you come back
You know,
and
I came back home here at Pitt Meadows, just local to my mom, and right away she could see that there was something right. And with summer months there in 06, barely sleeping at all, and we were getting put onto another operation, onto another, you know, in the driver's seat in my labs there, like just leaning against the engine compartment while it's running there and catching a little bit of Z's, and then it'd come over the radio, okay, let's go again. You get up, and so little naps here and there. So it, you know, couple months of that sustained, it's not healthy. And I was drinking Red Bulls one after another to keep up, and caffeine,
Keep
so
alert.
wherever I could get it, caffeine gums we were getting, and it definitely has some wear on your body. Your adrenals get exhausted, and yeah, you're worn right down to zero by the end.
Do you realize that when it's happening to you?
You don't have time to realize that.
Right.
You got to do your job. We got to push that all down, and we see people right next to us, people we served with, that get killed, and you got to keep going, and you got to push it down. Like I turned into a pretty cold-hearted soldier there through those summer months because I had to.
Just
I had
to
to
survive.
protect myself, and I had to protect the people next to me. We had to get the job done. I was on a training exercise, and our vehicle actually got hit by lightning. And we are right at the point of contact to get hit by lightning. It's a kaboom instantly.
Yes.
It was like an IED, and that was 3-4 months before I finally had to leave the unit. It really triggered me, and that was the start of a downturn. I started self-medicating, drinking heavily to try and push this down, to try and kill the anxiety, and I was starting to build up in rage, and it was just, and then it got to this breaking point where I had to leave the unit, and it was a really hard go. Right away they started pushing pharmaceuticals on me, and they were actually making it worse. It wasn't until 2014 in the summer there, a friend of mine, a fellow veteran, his wife gave me a bottle of cannabinoid oil, which doesn't have THC in it.
Right,
It's just
CBD,
something
yeah.
that relaxes your nervous system. And so I brought it home, and I did it for a couple of days, and I didn't think anything was happening, but my wife it's again, like I said earlier, people on the outside will see the
Notice,
differences. My wife's like, this is, you know, you think there's nothing happening, but you've been happy for days. Your sense of humor came back, and you're not getting angry at all, and you're very relaxed. Like, I like you like this, right? And at that time, my wife, we had a code word, Tahiti, which meant time out if we started getting each other going, because it would just spiral and it would get mad, and people would raise voices, and so it quickly went from that to, instead of Tahiti, to go have a puff. Within a year.
Well, I guess when I first started out as a young prosecutor in Chicago, and I'd see all these drug cases, all the murder cases, I thought, gee, drugs are bad. These people shouldn't be using it. Let's prosecute them. But then the more I saw of it, I would see people with a long rap sheet of, could be dozens or more of mostly drug convictions. And I knew that this person was never going to get a job in the legitimate economy. All we were doing was cycling them right back into the drug trade. So putting all these public resources toward prosecution, we didn't change what we were doing. They didn't change what they were doing. And we were just making things worse and worse. And then in later years, when I worked for about 5 years in Afghanistan, I saw what we did to that country because we made their main cash crop, opium poppy, illegal. And the result was just massive corruption up through their Department of the Interior, which was their police, and their government. And it looked to me like the only thing which could be done to get a handle on this was legalized so it could be regulated.
One of my favorite parts of the series has been able to talk and speak to those folks, the advocates, the people that have been on the front lines and in some cases their entire lives fighting against prohibition, fighting for legalization, spending time behind bars, spending time in the courts, just not just for themselves, obviously, but for everyone, for the right to do what's going to be allowed to happen come July 1st, 2018. It was fascinating.
One of my favorites was Aaron Bedard and his whole stance behind, now that he's had cannabis in his life and how it's changed him for the better. Now he's a huge advocate and trying to get that accessible to other veterans, which is, I think it's a pretty amazing thing to.
Oh, yeah. And look, we couldn't get everybody on the, not everyone who appeared on the show could be on the wrap-up special. We saw, well, Ross Rebliati was in the piece. We saw from Ross, but Dana Larson, of course, Inga Frickland, who is a former prosecutor just outside of Chicago, spent a lifetime prosecuting drug cases, went to Afghanistan doing some work, came back, now lives in Oregon. Totally changed her tune on it completely. Definitely thinks it's been a waste of resources, the war on drugs. It's just fascinating to see the more people learn, the more educated they get, the more they seem to change their opinion. Now, we couldn't have everybody, as we said on the show, but one guest we had to have on. You don't run into many drug smugglers. You don't get the opportunity to talk to many drug smugglers. We did. We were lucky enough to have Brian O'Day on the show.
I'll tell you a brief little story. You get confronted with a situation and you know instantly whether to do it or not do it. At least that's my experience. And so a friend of mine was asking me one time, it was on the third day of a coke run, no sleep, and we were in a friend's kitchen, and she said to me, "How is it you've never gotten busted?" And I said, "Because I don't think about what I do." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I get confronted with a situation and instantly I know whether to go or not go with it, whether to do it or not do it. And as long as I follow that first knowing, I'm cool." And on the table was the complete works of Shakespeare. I flipped it open and this is what I read: that it is known is well enough. What grows more known grows worse to smother it. And it was Pericles, Act 1, Scene 1. And so pretty bizarre that I would encounter that, but that was basically it.
What I find interesting was you got out of the business and then you got caught. Is that how it played out?
Yeah, so basically the last deal we did was we made a 75-ton purchase over in Vietnam. And we split that into 2 loads. We brought it in 2 loads. So we brought the first load in, and we had a deal in our organization. No one did coke. And one of the guys wouldn't stop doing coke, so we got rid of him, told him to disappear, and he'd get paid. And he disappeared. He came back looking for money when we were halfway through it. We gave him a little bit of money. It didn't satisfy him. He went to the DEA, told them what we were doing, and they followed us for the next year. We didn't know it. However, we were able to discover, it's a long story, but if you want to know it, you can buy my book. We were able to discover the day before we were going to bring the load down from Alaska into Washington and then put it in our trucks and send it off to California and then from there to the US. The day before we brought it down, we were able to find out that they were on to us and they were actually following us. So, we quickly organized a ruse because basically now we knew that they knew, but they didn't know that we knew they knew. So we were able to pull it off, orchestrating them to go look at something while they, when we knew they were looking at what we wanted them to look at, we came into another port, broad daylight basically, and offloaded the trucks in 5 hours downtown Bellingham, and because they were looking elsewhere. And so finally, when we got the load down into California, we brought our boats that they were looking at down across the border from Alaska down the Inside Passage and across the Canadian border into the U.S. They hit us, 100 of them basically, helicopters and seaplanes and DEA and FBI and every acronym police agency. And there was fresh coffee and donuts on the boat. So they flipped. And,
nice welcome for you.
Yeah, I ended up with too much money, not enough brains, and had a coke overdose. So I got sober and I went to work at a drug and alcohol hospital after that. And that's when the cops showed up, when I was working I was the head of volunteers and I was doing a couple of groups there.
When you were looking for a job, and I'm assuming this is after you got out of jail, and the headline is, as people could see, former marijuana smuggler. And there it is. As part of your resume, co-owned and participated in the executive level management, 120 people worldwide, excess of 100 million annually. What was the mind thought going into putting that ad out there?
All right, so this was in March, April 2001. And I had been playing the market and I wasn't making any money and I was losing money. And one day I was sitting at the dining room table and my wife said to me, "Why don't you get a job?" And I said, "Get a job? Well, who's going to hire me? Like, what can I do? I never had a job in my life." And she said, "Oh, let's see. You had 110 people working with you around the world in secret and did $250 million worth of business using trains, boats, planes, every mode of transportation, and you don't know how to do anything." So I sat down and I wrote what eventually became that ad, and I wrote it, and I wrote the attributes that I thought I had in that business that I could transfer into the mundane world. And it occurred to me as I was reading it that, I'm not going down to the Bank of Montreal and getting a job with that resume. But what I could do is put an ad in the newspaper, and I bet that it gets some attention. One time only, $1,300. And they said to me, "Listen, put this in the classified ads in the financial section for a week for the same money. Listen, you could put this as the last thing in that newspaper. I guarantee you it's going to get read."
Oh, probably go viral, yeah.
I got 600 responses by mail with postage stamps sent to the National Post from all over the world. So it was pretty fun. I want to show you yesterday's paper. Okay. See that? See that right there?
Yep.
Let me go there. Let me go.
Oh. Yep.
Okay, and you see that guy?
Yep.
All right. Raf Susar, former deputy RCMP commissioner who served on the government's task force on cannabis legalization and regulation, is now president and CEO of Alethea, a cannabis health therapy company. Bite me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Okay, this guy still has beers and hangs out with guys who are still sending people to prison for that substance that this guy is now getting a 6-figure salary for, and God knows what other accoutrement.
You know what? I was wondering when you were going to come on the show, just about here you were, you went to jail for dealing with marijuana. You've had so many different incidents, and now all of a sudden it's going to be legal, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, but I'm getting a sense I can pick up on some of that.
Ernie Eves, former Premier of Ontario, head of the biggest pot company in Jamaica. The former Chief of Police of Toronto, the head of the whole thing. It was his file. I mean, listen, shoot me, put me in prison, lock me up, give me criminal records, take everything I own, take my business and give it to those guys who put me there.
Brian O'Day, without a doubt, maybe my favorite guest in the entire series.
Yeah, he was.
It's
he
just
was
what a story. The smuggler, it's just fantastic.
He was a cool guy.
It was like Miami Vice. It was like living up in personal with Miami Vice. It was very cool. It's hard to believe that wraps up 13 great weeks of THC Live on Facebook. We were live every week.
We were, and to prove that we were live, especially, we have a few clips to just show how things get real here in the studio.
Apparently you're having some trouble with your mic. I'm going over here
This
while
is real
we
live-
work on your mic,
live
and maybe it'll pick up on mine, Tom.
Okay, how about that?
Can you hear Tom now?
Is that better?
Can you hear Tom now on my mic?
How is that going?
Is anyone talking to me?
I've been doing translations in Italy, yes.
Okay.
Wow.
Oh, apparently this. Okay, hold on a sec. I got a little bit of a problem with Bocephus's mic, but no problem. It'll be my pleasure to hang with you right here.
Shane likes to get close on the couch.
There we go. No problem.
People will start calling you names like Pothead or Smoky McBongwater.
And
I'm still thinking of that Smoky McBongwater.
Oh, Smoky McBongwater.
Because you hear that all the time. The kids are always dropping that on the when you're out on a Saturday night. One of the more common nicknames. Sorry, I cut you off. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
Yes,
missed
Audrey
that one
Herman.
there.
Yeah. You know, this year for Halloween, I went to Smoky McBongwater.
You did?
Yes.
You'd make a good. Well, you are the Smoky.
It was
McBongwater
very
now.
popular
It's-
among some of the select group on the street.
Yes.
Others really didn't know what was happening. So those moments kind of just happened on our show, right? You know, technically things happen when you're live. Sometimes, though, we put a little more effort into it. And we were talking about Halloween, Smoky McBongwater. Well, we took it up a notch even further on Halloween.
THC Live wishes you a safe and happy Halloween. And I'm off.
Oh, I love the Roadrunner.
Although I
the
plunged
Roadrunner
to
connection.
my death, yeah.
Oh, I get it, but Wile E. Coyote never dies, either do you. It
Neither
was
do
all
I. The
good.
brown-haired version will, but that's okay. But so it's crazy. Yeah, we are wrapping up. You know, we've had 13 episodes. Today is number 13, 12 shows.
Yeah, it's been fantastic.
It's been an amazing season, but the fun's going to continue.
Yes, the conversation continues. The show's over, but you can still go to our Facebook page. You can still go to our YouTube channel at THC Live Space TV. Check out some past episodes, but you can share your comments on our Facebook page.
We want to hear from you. We want to know if you're liking the show, if you want to see more. The conversation is just beginning. It's going into a crazy time now, and so there's just going to be more questions, more things to find out. So we'd also like to thank Hubcast Studios for hosting.
Providing us this lovely home.
It is a beautiful, beautiful home here. So we'd like to thank you guys here at Hubcast, and
thank you all for taking part in our show every week, for going to the Facebook, sending in the questions. Without you guys, it's just us talking, so it's really not that interesting. So thanks for taking part, and we'll see you when we see you.
Adios.